Hey, Marga. Hey, everybody who's joining. Look at that. Excellent. Welcome, welcome. We'll get started here in just a few minutes as my colleagues come on the line here. I will make sure everybody knows that they are in the right place. My name is Jonathan Neal. I am the director of the Center for Business and Management of the Arts at Claremont Graduate University. And if you are joining us, you are here for our webinar on art and technology and business, where we will be joined with shortly, I'm sure, by Lauren Olfman, who is the director of the Center for Information Systems and Technology, as well as David Pagel, who is the chair of the art department, professor in the art department of the School of Arts and Humanities. And we will have a conversation about the intersection of our three disciplines at the university, as well as the intersection of these things out in the world today, as they become more and more interconnected given our current age of Corona. I hope everyone out there is staying safe and staying healthy. We'll probably talk for about 25 minutes, 30 minutes, and then we will field questions from you all that are joining us. I would ask that those questions come in the chat box. I think by this point, everybody is a Zoom professional, so understands how this works. By all means, if you have questions before then, you can put them into the chat window, and I will be looking at them, and Lauren and David will be looking at them, and we can answer those questions for you as they come in, about general topics, about our program information, and so forth. And then we are also joined by some of our admissions and external affairs staff who are instrumental in our activities, and they will be on the chat window as well, providing contact information if you need it for our programs and about Claremont Graduate University as well. So I'm looking, I don't think I see David or Lauren yet. So let me invite them briefly here. I'm sure that maybe that's what they are waiting for. Lauren Holtman. So I think that some of the things that I have been personally interested in, and we have been talking about with a number of people, has been, there's David, good, has been the way that the arts currently have had to move into a virtual landscape, a virtual world through technology platforms, in order to be able to do what it is that they want to do. I'm going to briefly welcome to our webinar David Pagel. David, how are you? David's got to unmute. There he is.
Yeah. Oh, thanks.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Sorry I'm a little bit late.
That's all right. I understand. It's a busy time. I just got off my own earlier Zoom call. I was just beginning to talk about how one of the conversations that I've been having quite a bit on over Zoom is how the art and cultural landscape has had to adopt and adapt various different technologies and technology platforms in order to do something like it was doing before. And I know you and I had that conversation once already. We have a regular Tuesday and Thursday conversation series called LA Arts in the Age of Corona, where we talk with professionals from the LA context about how they are faring and how their organizations and how their businesses and their communities are doing given the quarantine and the pandemic. And David, who moonlights as a critic for the Los Angeles Times, I wouldn't say moonlight, that's one of your other full-time gigs, joined me for one of those conversations and really gave some insight into how this is happening from the standpoint of the artists and the people who are really on the ground now having to communicate through these digital means. So David, it's good to see you. You're looking well, as usual.
Trying my best.
You much better backdrop than I have. So briefly for everyone on the line, to what extent have you been engaging, let's say, with online exhibitions or online content? And what are some of the sort of highs and lows of that experience for you personally, as you've been out there both doing your work as a critic, but also as an educator and just as a consumer of the arts here in Los Angeles?
Yeah, actually not too much, Jonathan. I check out different museums and different galleries just to see what they're doing with this, and I'm pretty impressed with the kind of like the remarkable number of online viewing rooms, which to me actually is just a new word for a website. I don't think it's, it sounds like it's neat and private and 3D, but it's still a website. So I'm still looking at everything I've seen online is a great way of finding out what's going on in the world, but still kind of an awful, horrible tease where it's like, yeah, that's going on and you can't get to it. So it's a way of like letting you know what's there. And it is a great way of staying informed and getting informed. And, now, we have a lot of time where we're stuck in our garages, our offices, our living rooms, our kitchens, and bedrooms looking online, and you can, travel around the world and find out about a lot more stuff, but it's still like, to me, it's not a substitute in any way. And it's actually, and after a while, to me, it feels almost cruel of like, the kind of like we're the boy in the bubble who can, see the world out there, but can't touch it or taste it or smell it.
Yeah. So that sounds like a full plea for like smell-o-vision, smell-o-rama.
I do think, however, though, it's catapulting lots of people, me included, more into the digital age. And I think it's actually forcing our students to develop skills with technology about getting their word out. So I'm still hoping it's a temporary situation, and this will like let us, bone up on digital skills and navigating that system with the intention of, going and seeing it and smelling it eventually.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. We've got Lauren Olfman, who has now joined us. Hi, Lauren.
Hi.
No problem.
I listened to David, who said the link wasn't working, but apparently it was working. So I took a digit off to try it.
There you go. That's good. So so Lauren, we just got going a little bit, and I've asked David sort of one of the stock questions that I've been asking most of the people who come to us from the arts and cultural sphere about how they have been adapting to the now online environment and what's lacking and kind of what's needed. Lauren, you come at it from a different perspective, since you are very much more on the back end, the programming and information sciences end.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious from your standpoint, what are some of the big either changes or transformations or necessities that you've been seeing? And again, this can be completely detached from art and culture. What is proving to be important or trend setting during the pandemic from the information systems context?
Well, I think the biggest single thing is that the video systems, video conferencing systems are working pretty well, given all the, I mean, there are lots of constraints on bandwidth and what people can afford and things like that. But I would say 2 years ago, we couldn't have done this. Some people were saying, oh, 10 years ago, it wouldn't have happened. I think 2 years ago, we couldn't have done what we've done. So from an IT information technology standpoint, technology seems to be well designed and holding up really well.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. As long as our Zoom call here doesn't get glitchy and force everybody off. But
yeah,
it is
on individual lines, it can happen. I mean, I taught obviously the second half of the semester, and there were more than a couple of times, maybe 3 times, where I had to sort of leave the meeting and reboot my computer, and I have pretty decent internet access.
So from your standpoint, is that just a matter of better infrastructure that's been out there, or have there been some changes in the way that programs are interoperable or other things that have also made this possible, made this kind of connectivity possible?
Yeah, I think there's some of that, but I think it's more the technology is just sort of, the bandwidth has increased, the design of the systems has improved, I think probably some interoperability with just networks and things like that. So I think those have all played into it, but yeah.
Well, it certainly is one of these things where we seem to have made this transition very fast, and it doesn't seem to be that the telephones or the internet connections or even the sort of programs that we're using to conduct these types of online engagements are the challenge.
Doesn't seem like it. I mean, it's obviously more about pedagogy. It's about comfort.
Yeah.
I just finished teaching a qualitative research methods course this semester. It's really, it's qualitative research methods for information systems and technology. And the students are grouped and they have to do a project. And one of the groups, it was a 2-person group, did a project about, they started it off as about online learning. And then, they sort of hit the jackpot. So they were really lucky, and they were smart. They just interviewed their classmates for the data collection. Then they came back to me and they were asking a lot about what I thought. And one of the conclusions that they came to and seemed pretty standard is, by starting off face to face, it wasn't so hard to transition to online. Had it just started from scratch and people didn't know each other, either they were first semester or something like that, it would have been a lot more difficult. So they had some really good, and I've forgotten that, and it doesn't matter right now, but they had some really good recommendations. And I thought, well, why didn't I wish I would have thought of that, or I'm certainly going to do that next time.
We'll have to make sure those get published out.
I think they can get it published. And, I told Patricia when they need to make a few revisions, but when they do that, I'm going to send it to Patricia and she can, at least maybe cobble together some recommendations for the faculty and for those that are instructional design people too.
For those that are online or who don't know who Patricia is, that's the executive vice president and provost of Claremont Graduate University. So Lauren's talking about student work, making it straight up to the highest echelons of the university for distribution back out.
Well, that's one of her projects was to start going online more and getting people to use the learning management system. So, David,
you were gonna. What'd you say?
Could I sneak a question in?
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
You may.
Lauren, I've looked at some studies that say that people actually retention is greater when something is read on paper rather than on a screen, which actually I was almost shocked to learn that, because I always thought that was just me, but it actually turns out to be true. So I'm kind of curious about what about retention for things learned online? Has there any studies started on that? I have a couple high schoolers at home, and they're both telling me that it's easier to learn in person.
Yeah. Okay. So, the way that we cope with, I don't know about the studies about reading. I typically like electronic documents, but I do download them to an iPad, and my old way, I've been doing it for more years than you want to know, but obviously highlighting and annotating documents. And I still do that, even though I love electronic, media. That's just me. But to answer your question, which was, about, face-to-face learning.
And retention.
And retention is that the breakout rooms that we have available in Zoom, for example, just allow so much of that give and take between the two students. And they have, surfaces where electronic surfaces where they can write down summaries of what they're talking about. And I use that a lot, both in the first half of the semester, because I was teaching in something called the Advanced Learning Environment or Advanced Learning Lab, something like that we have, which has 6 really large touch screen ViewSonic monitors and portable furniture. And I was basically breaking people out into groups, small groups, and giving them problems to solve, and in a qualitative research methods course. And it really worked well, and it was easy to transition to the online. So I'm not sure that face-to-face opportunity can't be, duplicated, at least in the graduate university domain. It may be harder for, the school districts to do it and undergrads to do it, because there's just so much bandwidth that has to be eaten up to do that.
David, it's an interesting question, because like retention, particularly of written material, is, that's like it's a certain kind of cognitive activity and a certain kind of cognitive uptake, and the experience that I'm sort of thinking of it is as like a doubling or a tripling of the kind of contact with it, right? If you have it on paper as well as on screen, and then delivered in some other format, maybe there's a different kind of retention, or maybe you retain different things. And here I'm making a leap, but I'm sort of translating that over into the conversation we were just having about what feels pretty kind of lacking when you when you're trying to consume works of visual art or other kinds of culture through these mediated circumstances, right, on a screen. But at the same time, I gotta think that since I began teaching, when I taught my first art history course, which was in art humanities at Columbia University when I was a TA back in the late 1990s, it was mediated, right? I mean, those images were on a screen. We were talking about slide lectures,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah. Exactly.
With me, doing my best impersonation of the faculty at the time, who I thought were, the faculty to impersonate. And so there's a kind of like faux theater that was going on, and yes, of course, this was New York, and so we should have spent more time in the museums, now that I remember. But Columbia had one of the biggest slide libraries, and so why make do with just what the Museum of Modern Art had on display in its galleries? When you had everything.
Yeah.
And and I got to be honest, I don't know how much of my students were retaining when they were snoring in the back row with the lights out, at 6 p.m. on a Thursday evening. These conditions of mediation have kind of been with us, and so I'm curious about this one, presenting both similar challenges as well as opportunities, right? I mean, the capacity to get a lot of information at your fingertips, and get a lot of feedback on that information. Lauren, this goes then also to the whole qualitative research component, right? I mean, like so much less like television broadcasts one to many, where this is really now, many to many mediums may prove kind of interesting or important. Do you, are you on Instagram, David?
I'm not, no.
You're not on Instagram, so old school. Lauren, are you on Instagram?
No.
Goodness me, what will the children do with you? Just as not that is the sort of end all and be all of technology platforms, but these kinds of image sharing networks have become very interesting places, both of business, of curation, of access, of communication, of criticism. That I'm fairly, I'd like to see more coming out of those platforms, and I'd like to see very curious to see our students do more kind of in those platforms and experiment with them and use them to different effect.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that, Jonathan. But I do want to also just be a little bit of an old school stickler and say, like, I think that it is a great, even a slide lecture, it's a great way of getting more information. Like I could go to a slide lecture and I could look at work in, I could go from Germany to France to Rio to LA to Seoul, whoa, and I'm putting these big things together. But I still think that that's linked to like information to a world that's out there that needs to be dealt with in the flesh, because I never go back to like a slide and say, I got to look at that slide again. Where it's like, where I will go visit the same goddamn painting at LACMA over and over and over again. And I don't think that's just the image part. It's there's something that art bears looking at again and again and again, where like a slide, maybe to refresh your mind what was there, but I don't ever like get a craving to go look at a website ever.
Yeah.
That could just be me though.
Yeah, could be you, because lots of people listen to music without having the live performance there, or the real band there, or whatever, right? So
right. Yeah, but I'm not talking about music.
No, I know.
Yeah, but I'm totally with you. I mean,
an analogy that may not work, but that could be you.
Because to me, it'd be like, well, yeah, it's fun to read a play, but it's I actually enjoy going to the play too.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Do you like watching it after the fact on a video though?
Oh, I never do that.
only when it's remade as something else, as like a major motion picture, right? When it's been remediated. I think that really the opportunity is, again, less in the kind of consumption mode and is more in the feedback mode, right? Like the ability to collect new information
and distribute it.
It is,
to me, that's where like the radical democratization of the whole endeavor goes, where it's not just like this, top down, like down and then spreading it.
You should see this, and then we just broadcast it out.
Right. It's really about generating cross current conversation.
Right.
I think that totally, that's the beauty of it.
And Lauren, that's where I want you to talk a little bit about. So, Lauren, I was very graciously invited to sit on one of Lauren's advisees' dissertation committees, and that was a CSAT student who developed basically a public art evaluation application. Lauren, would you provide just a little bit of the background for that?
Sure. So, I'm going to go back a little bit, but I think it's relevant. The city of LA has something called the Data Science Federation, which is a partnership between the city IT office. It's actually not called that, but I can't remember the exact name. And it's a unit of that, and universities in the area. And they come up, they have people that work in the data science group, and they go out to talk to managers of different parts of the city. And in this case, one of the managers was from the public art area. And they wanted to know, how do people think about public art in LA? you know, what is public art doing for neighborhoods and all this kind of thing. They have the city of LA, and probably most of you know this, have a 1%, not about the city of LA because Claremont has it too. There's 1% for art, they call it. So public buildings have to set aside 1/100th of their budget for art. And the fantastic example is the airport LAX. As bad as it is, they have lots of money put into art there because of that program, right? So anyway, all that said, we started to look for the student team, had that as a project, and actually there were two teams, and they started to look for information about how they could answer that question. There was hardly anything there. So one of the students on one of those teams, his name's Osama Mujahid, and he and I were talking about it, and we were saying, well, how could it happen? You know, we know something about applications, we know something about databases and so on. Maybe we could have an app that when you came close to or were advised that public art was in the area, you could go there, and if you went there, it could ask you, how did you like this? Would you share it with other people, trying to just get more people involved in evaluation and also in seeing the art anyway. So we decided that might be a good dissertation topic, and we talked to Jonathan about it and one of my colleagues, and it came to pass. It was a test drive about the city of Claremont public art, and you know that people are not really naturally respondent to those kinds of things. So there are some things that still need to be fixed, and Jonathan had some really good ideas about how to extend such things. But yeah, it was a neat project, and the whole idea of the public having a say in how public goods are spent, public money is spent, and how much they value it or what they'd like to see is really important. So.
And I thought that what was also interesting about that project, beyond the fact that it was interested in engagement with art and measuring it, but was also testing out various different inducements for that type of engagement. And so it was sort of the difference between a survey versus a chat bot that would pop up on your phone in a geotagged or a geofenced environment. And so there was in minutia, this project that Osama had been working on had a bunch of really interesting implications for how it is that that we would go forward. We would be engaged in art and cultural activities. And I think, again, it doesn't just have to be like, oh, is this good or is this bad, or did you go or did you not go? And so many of the things that we normally take to be standard issue when we think about what it is that museums or cultural commissions are trying to measure. But I could see a very enterprising writer or artist, David, getting their hands on something like this and really being able to sort of collect, great democratized either criticism or poetry or other things that might come out there.
Yeah, I totally am with you. And I'm surprised, Jonathan, there's not more of that going on, just given the way that the media in which art usually in the past have taken shape has gotten so much more fluid and flexible and crossing borders. And also just the shifts between like, well, are you an artist, or are you a historian, or are you a curator, or are you a critic, or are you a sociologist? Are you an anthropologist? There's places like the Museum of Jurassic Technology, the Center for Land Use, where it's like, what are these places? And to me, the digital info out there is just this great untapped potential of like taking the facts and running with them. Like make up a story and throw it against the wall and see if it sticks. See who responds. And like you could have a truckload of fun, and it's like, and to me it's just like this great source of potential power that no one's stopping you from doing. You're just like, say it, spit it out. And to me it's like there's just like it's almost like mind-bogglingly fluid and exciting. Like when I started out, if you wanted to say something about art, you had to appeal to the art magazines and get some editor there to like what you said and then to completely edit it and then to rewrite it. And now you can like skip those steps altogether and like make up a good story. Like it's, you know, and throw it against the wall.
Right. Right.
Well, come on, David.
Yeah. I'm working on it.
But I think that that's
something along those lines.
But I think that's also, David, I think one of the, what I really appreciated about Osama's project and also kind of where it took place is that, you know, we were basically across the street, and so Osama was also able to, you know, put up flyers and email all of our students, for people who are otherwise pretty engaged in art, both in Los Angeles and in Claremont, to respond, right? So you've got to kind of, you know, pre-filtered student body of people who are pretty engaged here. So I you know, my sense is that going the other direction, we have students in our art business and arts management programs who are thinking about how to put some of these things together. And for them, so much of the hurdle is like, well, I have no idea I don't know how to program an app, right? Like I don't know how to collect that information. You know, one thing that you do is you go and you take a class over in Lauren's program at the Center for Information Systems Technology. But the other easy thing is to just walk across and find some of the graduate students who are there, you know, and put out a description. Hey, do you know, here's what I'm thinking about. Here's what I'm trying to work on. Do you know anybody who would be able to help me? And that's what's so hard when you're outside of that context, right? I mean, it's so hard to, you know, you're talking to other people who are kind of like you. So it's like, David and I would be sitting there talking to a bunch of art writers being like, who's going to program this app for us? Right. And I have no idea. Whereas, you know, Lauren's guys are like, how are we going to find, you know, where are we going to find someone who writes for the LA Times?
Yeah.
The art building.
Yeah, exactly. Over in the art building. But that to me is there are really interesting, there's really interesting opportunities to be sort of seized upon there, as those sort of crossovers happen. And I'm more interested in seeing it from the standpoint of the artists themselves, like the MFA students and some of the others. You know, I think that we validate a lot of the traditional media, and importantly so. I think that there's no reason not to sort of turn away from sculpture and drawing and painting and things that have a kind of primordial quality. But David, sort of like you said, there's this, you know, this kind of entire world has been opened up to us in a way, right? And a lot of the boundaries are now looking less like boundaries about knowledge and just more like, I haven't spent a lot of time here in this new landscape. So, you know, personally, I'm sort of excited to see what those new activities are going to be, or what comes out of it.
Yeah. And one of the things I love, Jonathan, is like when those two different worlds kind of connect across the boundaries. Like to me, it's like, you know, a painter makes a painting and shows it to other paintings, and you have an interesting conversation develop. But to me, it's like if a painter makes a painting and shows it to a plumber, and then the plumber talks about it. And lots of times in my experience, the plumber has had, you know, like gets to the core of the matter, sometimes in a much more interesting way and grounded way, and a way with traction and real consequences than the you know, someone who might just get into more like, oh, how did you use phthalo blue in that way? And like, to me, it was like an insider question. And I like the both the different worlds people live in, momentarily crossing paths. Like I've been writing for a magazine in China, and the way I write about stuff is significantly different than the way I write about it here, because here I write about it for you know, arts professionals and people who've been doing it for there I write about someone who may not know that stuff, and it really shifts the nature of my writing. And I actually don't think it's in any way a dumbing down of my writing. I think it's a different kind of writing that's interesting. And I think that what you're talking about is like kind of my, you know, my personal me here and me there thing with the information people together with art people together with general public. And I think that, yeah, I don't think the general public has, you know, it's necessarily an unsophisticated response.
Not at all.
In any way.
Right. Lauren, I'm curious from your perspective, what do you think the next, what are some of the things that either you, your colleagues have been working on that is kind of like the next sort of edge or breakthrough that we can expect to sort of see? Because I look at knowledge production as a fundamentally a kind of creative activity, just like I think of sort of business and new venture creation as a creative activity, just like art making. What are you particularly excited about in your field, and what should we expect on the horizon in the years to come?
I mean, it's obvious that data science is a big deal and that people want to, get involved in it. And I'm not sure we're I think we can do the technical part of it, asking the right questions, and in a context or in a multi field context is a lot harder. And I think that's something that we can't control as well. So I think this conversation about, just being able to cross boundaries really impacts what we're going to be able to do with this ability to get people more data, which can turn into information and such. There's another piece to this, and I think that the people who are creative are much better at representing what those findings are, and that's not our strength. We might be creative in writing code or in solving certain technical problems, but the visual part of it is really important. There's some artistic piece to it, I think, that really matters. And we have a course that combines data analytics and information visualization, and it does a nice job of kind of getting to the basics, but having somebody who has that sort of eye for how something might be represented and how it tells us, and the story, and David was talking about that, just the story that the data tells is really important. So I think that's going to be a key domain for our field for a while yet. And then we're also bringing the spatial and locational parts of data, which is also a big deal.
Yeah, could you speak a little bit more about that? Because I know that we have the GIS, which are the geographic information systems concentrations, and that's a core piece of one of the things that happens at CGU. Could you give us a little bit more background on that?
Sure. So, I mean, the basic idea is that when we think about data, we can think about it in a place and, or a set of places, and we can layer all kinds of data on the idea of a map. And that's really important, because then you get this spatial sort of connection to what the data's telling, not just that it's about something. So, and this idea of geographic information systems has been around for, I don't know, since the late 60s. And one of the pioneers, or two of the pioneers, are the people who started something called ESRI, which is basically makes a geographic information system product called ArcGIS. It's the biggest selling GIS product in the world, and they're out in Redlands, California, just 30 minutes from us, and we have a really great partnership with them. So I think that's also a big deal. I think of that as part of the data science component of where things are going. But yeah, we're really lucky to have that connection. We have some really creative and brilliant students who come from that area.
Yeah, and I've been amazed. We've had one or the other of your faculty come in and just give a brief to some of our students, particularly in our entrepreneurship sequence, because so much, and David, I think you'll back me up here, so much of the arts, as we were just talking about, really is location specific and regional, not just public art, but the neighborhoods and the contexts in which artists engage these days is so much related to the physical circumstances, either where the work is being shown or where the artist has come from or where the work was made, or the individual storylines, the biographies often of the artists themselves or the communities that they're related to.
Yeah.
And I've always, and it's a little scary because you come in and you see the sheer amount of information that is available through the ArcGIS system, and that is at the fingertips of these students. And it's like you can map out more than just, it's not just where things are, but sort of, whether the people that have walked through your gallery door bought bananas in the last week, right?
Where?
and where they bought those bananas. And it's kind of extraordinary. And part of it's a little creepy, right? I mean, it's like one of those things that teaches you a lesson that you're never going to use your credit cards again, and you're going to go live in the wilds of northern Idaho off the grid. But you make peace with it pretty quickly because you're on this side of it.
And I think it does raise questions of what we think of as privacy, and then where it's like, what does like at first like, hey, I don't like people knowing that I bought bananas, but after I was like, I don't really care if people know that I bought bananas. And how do we? And the question always is what value do we attach to the information? And like the kind of knee-jerk response is like, well, it's mine, it's private, no one can share it. But like, really, do you care that people know that you ate bananas? Like, it doesn't, it's not that perverted. And again, that's the storytelling part that Lauren brought up. Like, how do we take this information and make sense of it? Because there is too much info, and it's like, and you want some kind of critical, intelligent, analytical framework to share the info, and that's where it gets really exciting. You can share it in an exciting way.
And in a different sort of vein, forget bananas, but when people go into a museum or into an art district, you can almost see now what they're interested in, and maybe what got them there, what part of the city they live in, or there's all these kinds of things. I think that's what the public art people in LA were really trying to get at. That kind of data still isn't really easily available. And even with Osama's going back to his project, still had to ask people to keep their locational notifications on, or else his system really didn't work properly.
Yeah, well, I mean, the pandemic may be the solution to that, because if it comes to some form of digital, track and trace system, then maybe the way to make that more digestible is to allow a bunch of the public art evaluation and applications piggyback onto that, and then perhaps the usability of it will seem to be outweighing the trade-off of privacy. But it still is it's a very, David, I think it's a hugely important conversation, because I mean that one about in this age of pandemic, there's this one of the things that I've been really sort of astounded by is that we're now in a context where anytime someone goes out in public, you are now masking the pieces of your face which had been the key components for facial recognition software, right? And so the surveillance state was also taken down by the pandemic. And as anybody who's got an iPhone that recognizes your face to unlock it has now realized that you can't do that with your mask on. And this is a within the arts and the arts and cultural context. I mean, these have been issues and things that artists have been dealing with and making work about and talking about for some time. And in a way, the entire sort of landscape has been reorganized on us very quickly. And there's a very brief window here where I think that you're going to get opportunities, right? People are going to see opportunities to, make work, intersect with the technology, figure out how to communicate and engage with new audiences. And, as this thing passes, or eventually does pass, a lot of those windows are going to shut again. So I kind of feel like it's almost like how quickly can we respond, and how fast can we move in order to, stake out some of this new undiscovered territory, which we didn't really know was out there until all of a sudden this thing made it possible. I mean, I think that, again, I kind of like, my feeling is that the artists artists and technologists, right? Like genuinely sort of like creative folks are at the forefront of that, right? I mean, Lauren, I don't know if it has the kind of, it rings similar, but there was this moment at the beginning of the internet, back in the kind of maybe into the 1980s, late 70s, 80s. It was like, this genuinely was a kind of utopian open space, right? It was kind of brand new that then everyone now kind of poo-poos as being, the domain of Google and Facebook and whatever else. But, it seems to me that a crisis of one sort of another opens those windows back up. I mean, if you get the feeling like that talking to some of your colleagues or having those conversations, or is it just all past?
I mean, I think there's so many layers to it, but right now I think I'm so focused on the delivery of content to people who aren't used to having their content delivered that way. I'm kind of locked in there, but yeah, I mean, I think I think you're right. I think opportunities are going to, and they've already, started to appear, and more will. We also do a lot of work in health informatics. So
I was about to bring that up. I was going to ask if you could talk a little bit about some of the work that you're doing on that front, because that seems to be so instrumental to what's happening now too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think people are collecting data, no doubt about it, and trying to find patterns maybe in the data. It's a little bit difficult in the sense that you can maybe get data from 50 states or 50 countries or something like that, enough data to really look at it. So there's some limiting features to it, but I think that's definitely going on. I'm working with a student who's doing sleep. She's looking at the CPAP, the continuous pressure machines that help people with their sleep apnea problem, or they're actually solutions to sleep apnea problems. But the problem is that people don't wear these masks, sort of, that are connected to the device, and how to influence them to do that. So doesn't sound like it's relevant in any way, but it took literally months to get that study okayed by the Human Subjects Review Board, Institutional Review Board, because everybody's doing COVID kind of research, either on patients or biologically or whatever else, pharmaceutically, so that it was that much harder, because the student has to work with Pomona Valley Hospital in this case. She finally just got the okay to go ahead, and they said, but now we're not seeing patients, so it's going to be really hard to recruit people for the study.
It occurs to me just as you were talking, two things. One, I want to remind everybody who's joining us that please, if you have questions, by all means, put them into the chat window, and we will get to them. As you were talking, Lauren, I was thinking that a good amount of what your students have been involved with across these various different disciplines that I think would actually be really interesting to see more of within the arts is these kinds of incentives to interface with the technology, right? Like how do you induce people, especially within the health environment, in order to be able to collect the information effectively and then being able to feed it back and get some outcomes? A lot of it is the sort of challenge about how do you develop more robust means to actually remind people to take a test or to get people to engage with a piece of technology now that they brought home, and used to come with the kind of authority of the doctor's office or the clinic or something like that. Right. And so, David, all that made me think of is like, I mean, we are endlessly trying to think about how do we get more people out there to, go to museums or go to galleries or, go to the theater, or to engage with these things either in their sort of virtual components or their in real life. And there must be, I mean, there not only, but there must be some technical solutions to that. I mean, would you accept your cell phone pinging you endlessly to like, take a left here? You're only, you're 30 feet from a gallery that's got a show that you wrote about that you haven't seen yet.
Yeah, I think that the more information you have, the better decisions you can make. So Yeah,
Just,
I'm not.
just as long as it's provided on paper.
No, the ping is okay.
Yeah. Well, again, it gets back to Osama's dissertation, which I mean is really important, because one of the options was that you would see the the art objects that were on display publicly, and you wouldn't get these notifications. So, but you still had, here are all the things that are available. Some people just may be motivated by that. I'm going to go once a month to an art display or once a week. And then the question is, will you share that with other people to get them stimulated to do that? So
Right.
some of the pinging can come from, just
People, word of mouth.
Word of mouth and ratings. I mean, we know how rating driven our world is now. And
That's right.
It's kind of icky in one way, but it's important. It's important to get, and especially from the standpoint of arts and humanities, I think it's really important, because the technology just sort of, subsumes in some ways some of the real important things that people need to interact with and need to know about, and are, they're paying taxes for, and all that kind of thing. They don't realize it. So I think it's a big deal, and certainly technology is going to be, it's just the way the world is right now. Technology is going to play a role in that.
Exactly. So along those lines, David, we have a question from our audience. What are the artistic skills, in your opinion, that will be most useful to develop as you move forward with the pace of technology today?
Yeah, to me, it's the same old stuff of like critical thinking and ingenuity. If you can, like, big picture views linked to in the weeds physicality. So it's like, in a way, like nothing really changed, but just like to being able to respond and adapt and be ingenious.
Be ingenious. It's a good way of putting it. I would add that specifically artistic skills, I think you nail it. I mean, I think you have to be able to engage and be critical of your own practice as well as the practices around you. And that struck me also, Lauren, something you had said earlier reminded me of there's this sort of great quote by a philosopher about how, no painter ever approaches the canvas totally blank. As a matter of fact, the canvas is already filled with the full weight of history, and it's the painter's job to kind of scrape away and to find an actual empty space on that canvas in which to work. I think that's important. I come at this from the sort of management standpoint, and I do think that artists need to be equally aware of the sort of communication sphere, and can't fall back on what for a long time was a myth but still is existent, that there's a kind of like, the artist alone in the studio making good work will persevere. I think, yes, good work will persevere, but there is the challenge to make sure that you know how to get that work seen, be able to articulate it, and to be able to, for lack of a better term, work the networks that allow art to circulate both in visual channels as well as in the discourse. And ignoring that, I think you ignore that at your peril, right? I think you outsource that at your peril, right? Yeah. You can't rely on getting the gallery or getting the agent or have anybody else do a good job of that for you any longer, or whether you ever could.
Yeah,
so that would be my one comment.
Totally agree, Jonathan. It isn't a communication game, and that, and I would add to yours that it isn't just then the artist is this set thing that's trying to communicate to people out there, but it's also about the artist having to communicate within and to his or her various selves, and get that internal communication going. So to me, it's a really wild two-way street with lots of intersections. But you like the more complex the communication is, the deeper and more intense it is, and that's just essential.
Yeah, I agree. And I'd be really interested to see and there's some artists who do this, who are sort of very taken with data and have done a lot of
Mhm.
kind of self-analysis and,
Mhm.
and capture their sort of like their own activities and their own economic lives and everything. But I'd be very interested to see more practices working in those fields and working with those tools, even just, even if it's not for outcomes, but it's just as, again, another set of tools, both in and outside of the studio,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
we
Absolutely.
know we know that there's sort of a generation of artists that have become more comfortable with code and more capacities, with the technological sphere. And again, it's not a requirement, but it's like if you have a facility with paint. I mean, some people have a facility with paint that others don't. Some people have a facility with, with drawing that others don't. If you have a facility with code or a facility with just plain language that others don't, I think you really see that come through in people's practices in
Yeah.
a way.
Yeah.
True.
And
Yep.
it's super important.
Yeah.
So we've got about 5 minutes left. I would say, David, any final thoughts for our audience here about what to look forward to on the horizon of our sort of the intersections of art and technology and business?
Yeah. Nothing specific, but something interesting is going to happen.
Lauren, how about you? That was big territory to stake out, David.
But I think it won't happen organically
Yeah.
necessarily, and I think what you're doing, Jonathan, and I know David's been really supportive as well as I have been, is kind of forcing it in some ways, get people really interested in these intersections, and then maybe it will become organic.
Yeah.
And there's to some extent this happens organically, but it's great. It's not like a normal connection. So
no, it's not. But I've actually been very pleased because we've had a number of students come into our programs, into what we have called these interfield combinations of the art business program plus fine art and art business plus information systems and technology.
Mm-hmm.
I think the information systems and technology degree has been a little bit more daunting to people, just because of some of the technical requirements and the quantitative requirements that go along with it. But it's been interesting because we've had a number of people who've come in and sort of seen it over there on the other side of the street, and they're like, oh, well, actually, it doesn't feel so daunting any longer. And then they take it up and they take advantage. And they're going out there with some really interesting combinations of skill sets. And I think more importantly, to David's point, sort of really interesting combinations of outlooks, of abilities to communicate across different types of mediums. And I got to think that going forward, the core piece of information systems technology is going to become such a core piece of so many different fields and so many different practices. It's not to say it would make you the best artist ever, but it's certainly going to give you a whole nother tool set, right? It's going to give you a whole nother set of things to at least dabble in, get interested in, and maybe it catches fire.
And there should be more of the reverse, where our students start to see the benefits of being able to interact with art as a business, art as a as a field of interest for people who we're just thinking about computing. There's lots of data there. There are lots of opportunities for creativity. We've talked about this. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that for David, that's where I think our management programs really, the management and the business program play this kind of bridge, right? They're like, they're kind of about the infrastructural background conditions that make possible all these other activities and promote all these other activities. And I think that Lauren, the ISNT programs are like another piece of that interesting infrastructure, just a very specialized and technical one piece of it.
Yeah, I think it's a really great tripod.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Well,
That's
listen.
why Andy is smiling over there.
So listen,
Leiden just now.
I want to thank everybody for joining us. David, thank you very much for your insight. Lauren, thank you as always.
Thank you for inviting me. Sorry I was late.
Absolutely. Anybody who's on the line, if you have more information, by all means, reach out to us through the chat window. You can get in touch with us through our admissions pages, and please be in touch. There'll be more of these to come.
Thanks a
Thanks,
lot.
everybody. Thanks. Bye-bye. Have a good day.
Bye, everyone. Yep. Take care.